Nikki here. I'm here today to do my spoiler review for Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is one of my absolute favorite classics and absolute favorite romances, as you will perceive as I talk about this book, because I can't help but just gush over it because of how much I like it and how much more I enjoy it each time I reread it. You follow Elizabeth Lizzie Bennet, and it's really kind of just a exploration of her daily life and what path she takes on the road to marriage. Along the way, you do get all these different and complex interactions with neighbors and with her sisters, and just within the group of people involved on her sisters' roads to marriage as well. And because of that, I found it very interesting, and you get a lot of really interesting information from Elizabeth as you follow her from her perspective. I do have my likes and dislikes as usual. However, something a little bit different here is because of how much I like the book, I had a really hard time coming up with dislikes, and as such, I just have two very nitpicky ones. But I will start with my likes as I usually do. The first one is the characters. I really love how they were diverse and very unique. But the thing I liked the most was the development of them, specifically the development of Darcy and Elizabeth. And I liked it so much because they went from being two like nice enough people, but if they had gotten together, they would have been very toxic for each other. And I love that before they actually got together, they grew as people and became just these genuinely nice people who would end up working really well together. And I loved that they had that important character growth before the relationship got to the romantic part, like the reciprocated romantic part. There was just something about following Lizzie, see her become a better person, and see that same change mirrored in Darcy that made the read very enjoyable for me. My second like is the plot. Even though it's not something I deal with, just this idea that there's a specific road to marriage for women in this time just really catches me, especially when it's one that's focused so much on the relationships these women form and how high they place their own happiness despite a lack of support either from the parents or society in making that kind of choice. And I really enjoyed the different obstacles that were presented for the couples on their road to marriage. Like you get the obstacle between Lydia and Wickham, you get the obstacle between Jane and Bingley, and then you get the obstacle between Elizabeth herself and Darcy, all of which is explained very interestingly from Elizabeth's perspective. And my third like is the way that the social norms of the time were explained. The really simple stuff was it was like assumed you knew, but was written in such context that you would understand what the author was getting at. And anything that was more major or more confusing was explained either with interpersonal interactions with the characters or just reflection within Elizabeth's point of view, which I really enjoyed, because then you got kind of the censure of society and then the dismissiveness or censure of Elizabeth kind of as she perceived these different wrongs. And just because of how it was written and how it was explained and how well it fit in. My first dislike, moving on to them, is the pacing. It was a bit slow. This isn't as big of a thing for me, but I know people who aren't huge character-driven readers probably will find it drags a lot more because there isn't a lot of action. The focus is really on the interpersonal reactions and the character development, so this plot moves only as fast as the characters are able to meet with people and then grow from the interaction itself. And then my second dislike is actually more of a warning, to be honest. The writing style can be a bit much for a reader, especially if you're very new to classics. It's not a big thing, but it is something that can come up, especially if you've never read other classics before. And with that, I will move to my characters. And so within the characters, I'm going to talk about 4 kind of individually, and then I'll talk about a few small groups and just make a few comments on how they play into the character development and the plot. I'm going to start with Elizabeth Bennet. She's witty, she's funny, she cares about her family, and she is incredibly judgmental. And these four things really kind of coalesce into a very interesting perspective to read from. I say this because she is easy to follow and she's very relatable, just because all of these, especially for me, because these traits are things I find in myself. Well, I like to think I'm witty, but who knows? And I try not to be judgmental, but I definitely am. It's very interesting to see how her perspective interacts with the world and interacts with other people. She was very interesting to follow because she was made so relatable by Jane Austen. That's all I really have to say about Lizzie. Next I'll move on to Jane Bennet, her elder sister. She is sweet and kind and very demure, and she's like the epitome of what you expect a woman in this world to be. The only issue with her, really, is that she keeps her cards very close to her chest and she doesn't express genuine emotion very easily. This is just something that I really enjoyed about her character, because she does come off as being such a, like, she's put on this pillar because of what she embodies, but she really is just as flawed as everybody else, just in different ways. Then you get the next character, Charles Bingley. He is the recipient of Jane Bennet's love, and he reciprocates it himself. That was a terrible sentence. I'm not redoing it. And Charles Bingley is very similar to Jane, except he's a little bit more effusive about his emotions. He's friendly, he cares about his friends and family very deeply, but he is very easily influenced by his friends and family because of that, which leads to kind of the more tumultuous nature of the relationship between himself and Jane. And with that, I'll move directly into Fitzwilliam Darcy. He ends up being Lizzie Bennet's love interest by the end, which I really enjoyed because he did do a lot of positive growth throughout the story, which led him to be actually quite a good match for her. And he's just really interesting to see grow, although most of the growth is from Lizzie's perspective. And it's interesting to watch him grow so much because he is so prideful and arrogant, but especially because it is matched so well with just this awkwardness and shyness that he has. And it's very interesting to see that grow both externally from Elizabeth's point of view and then from the letter he writes to her, which is a bit more of an internal summation of this growth. And it's so interesting to see it play out. And then when it culminates kind of in their relationship, I love the way the two of them talk and the fact that they did become better people, less toxic people overall before they really got into that relationship. So then they were better for each other by the time they got there. With that, that's all I really have to say about the individual characters I want to talk about. They are kind of my four favorite, and they are the four main focus of this book. But I'm going to break this down into the characters into a couple more groups. You get the Netherfield guests, which is, you get Miss Bingley and Mr. and Mrs. Hurst. They are Charles Bingley's sister and brother-in-law. And they are very interesting because they're such kind of like the epitome of what they're supposed to be for the level of society they're at. And they were very interesting because their very unique personalities made them, ended up pushing their friends and relations into decisions they didn't want them to make just because of how they presented themselves in opposition of them. And then you get the Bennets. So Mr. and Mrs. Bennet are loving parents for the most part, but Mrs. Bennet is just like something else entirely when it comes to high society. She is very embarrassing and not genteel, and that causes a lot of strain on how her daughters are received in certain societies and in certain company. And it's talked about kind of at length towards the end of the book about how that infects the image that they're able to present to other people. And then you have the sisters. Mary isn't anything special. She's accomplished, but she's bland and she isn't talked about a lot. But then you have their sister Lydia, who is just their mother, but 30 years younger, and it is very hard to take her. And just the way that she interacts, especially with her sister Kitty or Catherine, it's very interesting to see the way that that entire family acts as a unit, but then how the parents act individually and the sisters act individually to push both the sisters and the Netherfield guests, including Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley, it forwards in their development and push the plot forward. That's really all I have to say, other than like these two groups, the Bennets and the Netherfield guests. They just, because of how unique each character was, they did a very good job of just developing the characters, especially the characters of Darcy and Elizabeth, at least in my personal opinion. They helped push them towards the end, towards the desired end goal. And that's all I have to say for the characters. I'll move into my wrap-up. This book is a solid 5 out of 5 stars for me. Any complaints I have are super nitpicky and super minor, to me at least. And I can't recommend this book enough. The plot, the characters, and the character development are very solid. Jane Austen is a fabulous and talented writer, and I enjoy this book every time I pick it up to reread. My only caution would be for those of you who haven't read a lot of classics, this shouldn't be your first classic. The writing can be a little bit harder to get through, but it's not so hard that I wouldn't recommend putting it off too long to read. It's really one of my favorites, and I can't say enough good things about it. But I will end there, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.